kick off this evening. We've got Kim Stackhouse-Lawson from National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and she's the Director of Sustainability there, and she is going to be talking about some of the sustainable issues, sustainable beef production that they're seeing.
Okay, so I work for NCBA and I run our sustainability research program. I'd like to thank everybody for being on tonight. It's certainly a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you what we're doing. And I haven't been able to congratulate the Ohio State University on your big win, so congratulations on the national championship. You had fans here from Denver rooting for you, so we were very pleased with the outcome. So way to go before we get started. So sustainability has become a growing concern and a growing issue within our beef industry. And I'm going to kind of walk you through today the background about how that was started, some work that the check office funded, and some research that we've done both from a scientific standpoint and more about the gains we've seen in the beef industry through a sustainability lens, but then also some research about consumers. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the landscape looks like for the industry moving forward outside of the area of research. So in the beef industry, we really began talking about sustainability in 2006. And if you guys think back to 2006, it's when the FAO released the report Livestock's Long Shadow. And in that report, the FAO claimed that livestock was responsible for 18% of all man-made greenhouse gases globally. And we started to see major media outlets talk about greenhouse gases and how they relate to beef. And so really our sustainability conversation started through a greenhouse gas lens. And if you guys think back to Time in 2007, the front cover actually said a 16-ounce T-bone is like a Hummer on a plate. And switching to vegetarianism can shrink your carbon footprint by 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. At the same time, Meatless Monday campaign became very popular. And actually, I was a first-year master's student when Livestock's Long Shadow came out. And I was in an office, and if there's any graduate students in the audience or those of you who went to graduate school, you know you're stacked on top of each other. So we were in an office about the size of a closet with 4 of us in there. My major professor at the time walked in with this giant book. Livestock's Long Shadow is a book. And he slapped it on my desk and said, "Welcome to the team, Stackhouse. Figure out what this says." And so that's when I began working on this issue. And the first thing as I was reading through this FAO report claiming that livestock was responsible for more man-made greenhouse gases than all of the world's transportation. So think about that for a moment. You know, livestock and beef in general was responsible for more greenhouse gases than all of the world's trucks, planes, cars, ships, etc. And it dawned on me that there were some serious differences between what the FAO was portraying for the livestock industry and even what we hear stateside through agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, who claim that livestock is responsible for 3.4% of our man-made greenhouse gases. So really a stark difference, right, between 18% and 3.4%. And we've published a report which, actually looks at how the FAO approached this report through Livestock's Long Shadow. And what we found is that a complete life cycle assessment wasn't conducted for transportation. That, in fact, they were comparing emissions all along, greenhouse gas emissions for the entire beef value chain, from feed and fertilizer production to consumer. And for transportation, they were only measuring tailpipe emissions. So there were some real differences in this report and how it was portrayed. Nonetheless, it really started the conversation for the beef industry in sustainability. So today, sustainability is bigger than a greenhouse gas issue, and I'm sure all of you have heard a presenter at some point or another talk about the world that we need to feed in 2050. From a beef perspective, this is a huge opportunity. Not only will we need 70% more agriculture commodities, so all commodities, all food commodities, but the expectation of beef is to double we're going to need 100% more beef. And the reason we're going to need so much more beef is because the economies in the third world are exploding. They're becoming countries that can actually pay for food. And we know that as income rises 9% in impoverished countries, the consumption of red meat, or as income rises 10%, the consumption of red meat rises 9%. So beef is going to be a part of feeding the growing world. And we have to do so, just like everyone else, on fewer resources, less land, with less water, etc. So the conversation today in the sustainability community is less about greenhouse gases. That's certainly how it started. But today it's about a bigger picture. It's about everybody doing a better job to use fewer resources to feed the world. And it's about this idea of continuous improvement. So this expectation that nobody is perfect. Now, if I was to ask everybody on the webinar, or even in a room with 1,000 people, how they would define sustainability, everybody would give me a different answer. And that's okay. But I think at its core, all of us can define sustainability as using fewer resources to produce more. We already know, we've talked about beef being a part of that solution, and one of the ways that the beef industry has engaged is that the checkoff has funded the largest life cycle assessment or sustainability assessment to benchmark the sustainability of beef production. So I learned long ago that as we start these conversations, there's something that we have to be able to agree on. And I actually learned this while I was talking to a group of sustainability PhD students at Yale. And I recognized that perhaps those Yale students didn't understand this core philosophy that a zero impact isn't possible. That in fact, the clothes we eat, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the vehicles we drive, and the houses we live in, that there's an impact associated with those. And that's okay, because ultimately that's how we sustain life. So what we're driving for from a sustainability perspective is that there's trade-offs. And we always need to just remember that we want to improve over time. But we need to make sure that the trade-offs that we're making don't result in unintended consequences that we haven't thought of before. So I always like to start out with high level, sort of what did we find. So we conducted the largest sustainability assessment ever to be conducted in agriculture on behalf of the beef checkoff. And we compared beef production from the 1970s to 2005 and to 2011. And for this talk, I'm only going to be presenting to you the differences between 2005 and 2011. So in 6 years, the beef industry has improved its overall sustainability by 5%. And if you look at just the environmental and social aspects of sustainability, we've improved 7%. And I'll get to how we define sustainability in just a little bit. Then the next question I always get is, well, Kim, as producers, we weren't trying to improve our sustainability. And that seems like a pretty good result in just 6 years to have improved 5%. So what were we doing? And it's pretty simple. Remember that underlying definition about efficiency, producing more with less. But there's been innovations up and down the food system, from agronomists to botanists to animal scientists to engineers. There's been tons of innovations that have taken place that have driven this improvement that we've seen in beef. So on the on-farm side, we see improvements in crop yields, the great work New Holland, Case, John Deere, and others have done with machinery technology, the innovations in irrigation technology. I mean, think about the changes in pivot engineering that we've seen in the last 25 years and how much more efficient water use is. All the good work that's been done in manure management, you're going to hear some detailed conversations about this in the coming presentations after mine. Precision farming, the fact that we can map different soil types across the field and specify different seed varieties or different fertilizer that may be used and actually vary that within a field is tremendous. And then of course the good work that's gone on in animal performance, animal husbandry, animal nutrition, etc. And there's also been some tremendous things that have happened on the post-harvest side. So after that animal is harvested. Number one is biogas capture. Approximately 60%, and that's 60% of the energy used in our packing plants is actually harvested from biological waste in wastewater. Amazing innovations in closed-loop water cooling systems, wastewater recycling, and then right-size packaging. And as an animal scientist, I didn't know anything about right-sizing or right-size packaging, but I got to learn a lot about it. And the great example we have in the beef industry is our 1-pound ground beef chub. So if you go to the grocery store now, you buy ground beef in kind of a cylindrical vacuum packaged tube, right? Well, that beef is only packaged one time. It comes from the packer like that, where meat that is served or purchased in trays is actually packaged twice. It's packaged through a primal, and then it's packaged again in a tray material. But what's interesting is that there's lots of industries right-sizing things. The example I've got is Capri Sun. So I don't know if any of you grew up with juice boxes in your lunches, or perhaps you gave juice boxes to your children to take to school. I don't have any kids yet, but my surrogate little nephew, who's one of my best friend's son, we were out at the barn the other day, and he was drinking out of a Capri Sun juice box. And I thought that Capri Sun was not putting as much juice in his juice box. So I called him over and I said, "Hey, can I see your juice box?" And in fact, there was the same amount of juice in that juice box as when I was a little kid. But Capri Sun is also using less packaging to get their product to the consumer. They're not doing that to improve Capri Sun's sustainability, right? They're doing that because it's a money saver for them, right? Packaging is expensive. So that oftentimes what we see in improvements in sustainability, we also see improvements on the economic side, on that return on investment, so to say. So there were also some things that really surprised us when we concluded with this initial research project. Number one was the vast definitions of sustainability, and the fact that greenhouse gases don't even resonate in the top 10 concerns of our interested stakeholders anymore. There's actually more concerns on animal welfare and traceability, and that's really how people have begun to define sustainability today. And the second thing we learned about was food waste. Do you know that 40% of our food is wasted by the American consumer, resulting in about a $2,500 a year cost for each family and a $161 billion loss for our great nation? It's a serious problem. And in beef, if we could reduce beef waste by the consumer by half, we would improve the sustainability of our product by 10% overnight. The nice thing about food waste is that that is not a fight beef has to fight alone. That's a fight agriculture needs to address. It's a fight society needs to address, and if we are going to feed the world in 2050, we have to change our food waste habits. So the first part of our life cycle assessment was a little non-traditional. We actually surveyed folks. We surveyed 90 stakeholders along the beef value chain, both our friends and our foes, and we asked them, what are your number one concerns when it comes to sustainability about beef? And this was done in early 2011. And even at that time, there was a huge concern and a variety of concern coming from our stakeholders. So anything from labor rights to animal welfare to occupational health and safety to trade to quality to efficiency to rural economies to biodiversity to water emissions to land management, you get the point. Sustainability has become everything to everyone. If you have a problem with something, you blame it on sustainability, right? And when I was a first year, immediately out of graduate school, listening to this feedback was overwhelming because I felt like I couldn't answer all of these questions. Well, we're not alone. Sustainability is being defined every single day. But where most industries have landed, and where the beef industry was one of the very first to land, was actually a very broad definition around sustainability to ensure that we could encompass all of these growing concerns. So the beef industry defines sustainability as meeting the growing global demand for beef by balancing environmental responsibility, economic opportunity, and social diligence. So I'm assuming that most of you on the phone are pretty familiar with the beef life cycle and know how complex and segmented our industry is. So I'm going to take the opportunity on this slide to actually talk about how we measure sustainability. So think about measuring sustainability and what we call a life cycle assessment, much like an accounting model or system, where you account for all of the inputs in and all of the outputs out. Now that's quite complicated during the on-farm portion of a life cycle assessment for beef, because inputs are dependent upon a variety of things, like weather, soil type, animal age, animal growth, etc. So let's focus on something that's a little bit easier to understand, where we actually have inputs and outputs. Let's focus on the packing sector. So we were working with one of our 3 packers that provided us data into this very large life cycle assessment. We were sitting around a table with about 30 of their plant engineers, and we were going through every line item that they gave us in an input category. Over 600 data entry points in Excel. Go into the packers packing sector to get our product of beef to the consumer. And we got to the line item of toilet paper. And we knew how much toilet paper that plant used for its workers every single day. The first question was, great, how many rolls of toilet paper are in a case of toilet paper? And then how much paper is on each roll of toilet paper? Because I need to know if the total paper used for toilet paper is greater or less than 1% of the total paper used in the plant. If it's greater than 1%, I have to include the impacts of toilet paper into our beef life cycle assessment, and if it's less than 1%, I am granted by life cycle assessment ISO standards to leave it out. Toilet paper is less than 1%, but that's the sort of detailed data collection that goes into every single segment of our beef supply chain to populate a life cycle assessment and to give us our sustainability results as an industry. So here's some high-level data for you to view, which actually gives you the opportunity to see consumer price, which is listed as cost along the x-axis, and environmental and social impact, which is just listed as environmental impact along the y-axis. And as you can see, high cost and high environmental impact are located towards the xy axis. So it's a little bit backwards how you see normal graphs. So the highest sustainability would be towards that lighter portion, moving away from the XY axis. So you can see that from the bubbles, comparing the brown bubble 2005 to 2011, we are 5% more sustainable than we were in those. We achieved a 5% improvement in sustainability in 6 years. And you'll also notice that that yellow bubble is actually trending towards the high cost, so backwards, kind of along the x-axis. The reason that it's doing that is because from 2005 to 2011, the cost, the consumer price of beef went up. Okay? Now, that's a good thing for beef producers, but we need to keep in mind that when we add up all of the economic costs along the value chain, the way we can look back at it is through consumer price. The other way to think about this is to compare beef to lamb. And usually I would ask an audience, how many of you have consumed lamb in the last month? And there may be, out of 400 people, 3 that raise their hands. And you ask why. The reason is that lamb is very, very expensive, and it has priced itself out of the marketplace. We have to be very careful in beef that consumer price stays within what the consumer can afford, because it is the #1 driver of demand. And we want that beef product to stay in the center of the consumer's plate 2 to 3 times a week. That's our industry goal. So if we take back from a sustainability perspective, looking at that y-axis of environmental impact, and we break it out into all of the things that we measured in our life cycle assessment, what you get is an environmental fingerprint. And you can see here that the yellow line is smaller than the brown line in resource use, land use, water use, energy use, emissions, which go to air, water, and soil, and then 2 social categories, toxicity potential and occupational illnesses and accidents. We don't have time today to go through all of the results, but I'm going to show you some high-level figures here in an infographic. And you can see that our story around water emissions is a reduction of our emissions to water by 10%. We've improved our emissions to soil, or reduced our emission to soil, by 7%. We've reduced our greenhouse gases by 2%. We've reduced occupational illnesses and accidents by 32%. We've reduced energy use by 2%. We've reduced resource consumption by 2%. And we've reduced water use by 3%. So why do we see these things? Well, emissions to water are predominantly a reduction from improvements in crop yields and increased use of precision farming techniques. So potentially not something that a beef producer has any control of, but some of the good work that's going on from our farmers. Emissions to soil, again, most of our emissions that go to soil actually come through fertilizer application. So anytime we see improvements in crop yields, increased precision farming techniques, we see tremendous changes in a lot of these results, environmental results and environmental impacts of beef production. Greenhouse gas emissions are predominantly a reduction in improved genetics, health, and nutrition of cattle, and also increased biogas capture from our packing plants. The reduction in occupational illnesses and accidents is a little bit of that comes from the farming community, but there's been tremendous achievements attained in safety procedures and protocols from our packers. And it goes on down the line. You can sort of see all of the different reductions that we've been able to achieve from a sustainability perspective as beef. The life cycle assessment actually studied over 14 different impact categories. It's published in the Journal of Animal Science, and it's also third-party certified by the largest third-party certification company in the world, NSF, which is the same certification company that certifies all ISO standards. So it's been very well received by even some of our greatest critics. So now I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the consumer. So we did an initial consumer study on sustainability using 1,800 beef-eating consumers. So those consumers that eat beef 2 to 3 times a week. We didn't see any changes in why people purchase beef. Generally, it's based on the quality of the product, the price of that product, value for the product, health and safety attributes. That's very traditional. Those are our traditional demand drivers for beef production. But even under safety, you're beginning to see a trend, a transition into what people are starting to call sustainability, or this increased concern around what a consumer is purchasing matching with their belief system. We also asked these consumers what their perceptions were of industry sustainability. And as you can see, vegetables, fruit, dairy, and seafood all ranked higher than beef, albeit seafood not by very much. But interestingly enough, in every single commodity for agriculture, we have an opportunity with opinion leaders. 63% of opinion elites, we also call those thought leaders, people that blog, people that talk to their friends about food, actually think that the beef industry is doing a good job as it relates to sustainability. So we see this as an opportunity to empower those opinion elites or those thought leaders to let them know more about our industry. So the idea being, if we can tell them, the opinion elites, the beef story, and they find it believable, find the science is well done, believe that our producers are on a path to continuous improvement, oftentimes they can tell the story for us. We also asked those consumers how they defined sustainability. And out of the 1,800 that we surveyed, over half didn't answer the question. So that to me means that they can't. Of the remaining half that answered, the most common response was the ability to reuse, which I think is very positive. The second most common response was the ability to maintain production. So about 20% of our consumers that answered this question actually understand this sort of idea of producing more with less. But then the third most common answer, which was about 15% of our consumers, said that it's the amount of time food stays good. So to them, it's actually a shelf life concern. So we really have an opportunity to help our consumers understand about sustainability and to actually help define it for them. So then we ask them, we know that sustainability is important to you because you've told us as consumers, but what about sustainability is important to you? And interestingly enough, they say that being a responsible producer is how they define sustainability, followed by environmentally friendly and treats animals humanely. Interestingly, local is quite low on the list, reduces greenhouse gases even lower than that, and profitable is at the very bottom of the list. So while our consumers appreciate things like providing a fair wage, they do not want us to talk about how profitable we are as an industry or even as a producer. Then we ask them, would you be interested in hearing more about sustainable beef? We know that you have a 30-second, focused time window. You would never want to hear an advertisement longer than 30 seconds. But if we put one out about sustainable beef, would you be interested in learning about it or hearing more? And over 75% of them said that they would be neutral or actually interested in hearing more about sustainable beef. So again, it's something that they care about. They're not really sure how to define it, but it may be an opportunity for us to drive beef demand. Then we explained our research project, in the same research project that I've just presented to you, in a one-page fashion as an infographic. We explained to them that it was third-party certified and that they could feel that the research was credible. And we asked them how many of them would be interested in hearing about the numbers from our beef sustainability assessment. 70% of them said that they would be interested in hearing how we've reduced or improved our water quality or improved our occupational illnesses and accidents, which I think is a tremendous opportunity for us as a beef industry. So let's switch gears now and shift into how the industry is responding to the pressures that we hear about sustainability. I'm sure you all have heard the goals and the aspirational goals that companies like Walmart and McDonald's have set out for beef. Now, the industry actually has passed a statement of sustainability principles that NCBA has allowed our executive committee and our board of directors to vote on. And that guides NCBA staff and NCBA policy to actually engage in sustainability conversations like the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the Sustainability Consortium, and the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I'm going to end with a few things that I'd like you to keep in mind. When the Green Revolution started, it almost stopped just as soon as it started. And the greenhouse gas issue for consumers is similar to all of the greenwashing that happened. Consumers aren't going to talk to you or aren't going to listen much about greenhouse gases or other green efforts. But sustainability has become a mindset, not only a mindset in consumers, but it's become a business decision by many major companies like McDonald's and Walmart. Beef continues to be a commodity that is targeted, a commodity that is criticized through a sustainability lens more than any other commodity that is on the market today. But I think we've got some real opportunities, and I think we've realized a lot of benefits in actually being proactive and progressive around the area of beef sustainability. I think that it perhaps gives us the most proactive and progressive way to ever tell our beef story. We have good science that provided us a tremendous baseline from which to start, and it's allowed us to focus in the right areas for improvement. In other words, we would have never known that food waste was our #1 issue unless we had done this sort of research. And it also allows us to prove that U.S. beef is the most sustainable beef in the world, which it is. So I'm going to leave you with 3 things to keep in mind. When somebody comes up and talks to you about sustainability, remember that their expectation is a continuous improvement over time. They expect you to be on a journey for sustainability, not to already be at your destination. And this is especially true with those thought leaders, influencers, and some of our major consumers. And finally, the beef industry has a lot to be proud of. I don't know of many other industries that have sixth and seventh and eighth even generations that are involved in producing their product. But beef does. We just want there to be a ninth, 10th, and 11th generation. And I think that the sustainability area could be a potential way to tell that beef story. So with that, Jeff, I'd be happy to answer any questions if that's a possibility. Okay, so the first question was, could I please repeat the definition of sustainability? So we've defined it quite broadly as the beef checkoff in an effort to include, in the best way we can, sort of everyone's definition. So we define it as meeting the growing global demand for beef by balancing environmental responsibility, economic opportunity, and social diligence. So the way I translate that for our beef producers on the ranch, our cow-calf producers, is leave your ranch in better environmental condition than what you found it. Make sure that your kids have got a viable business, a thriving business, which they can take over from a financial standpoint, and continue to be involved in your communities in whatever way that you're comfortable with. A lot of our ranchers or our producers provide tours or sit on school boards, and those are the ways we can contribute to sustainability. So I hope that helps. If that didn't answer your question, please ask another question or clarify. The next question was, what are your thoughts on the Global Roundtable for beef sustainability? The Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has been underway since 2010, and NCBA has been a member for quite some time. I serve on the board of directors and was involved in drafting the principles and criteria. I would say that GRSB has done a great job of defining and chalking the boundary lines for beef globally. Now, having said that, one of the things that GRSB is founded on is that there will be regional roundtables, like I mentioned the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, where there are initial discussions taking place that will figure out how to implement those very broad definitions in meaningful ways to our producers. The other thing I like about GRSB is that producers are very involved and very influential. So we submitted comments on the principles and criteria publicly, and almost 95% of our comments were accepted. So I think that gives great recognition to the very important role that producers play in sustainability, and they have continued to encourage our collaboration and our membership, and have also reiterated time and time again that in the U.S. we would figure out the best way to implement those high-level principles and criteria in meaningful ways for our industry. So again, if I didn't answer that well, please ask for more clarification. The next question is, what percentage of food waste is at the consumer level versus the processor level? So the consumer, from processing to consumer, is 40%. The processor and the retail are responsible for 10% of that. So our packers and our retail partners are only responsible for 10% of the overall 40%. Of that, the packers are only responsible for about 2%. They waste very, very little. Retailers about 8%. And 30% is responsible for that consumer level, which includes restaurants, to be clear. So it truly is a consumer kind of restaurant food service issue that we've got to tackle. The next question is, what is McDonald's wanting out of beef producers? So great question, and I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that, but McDonald's has been involved in the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and they have said that they are going to be sourcing sustainable beef. They haven't decided how much. They're going to be sourcing sustainable beef using the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef principles and criteria. They have been involved in the initial discussions around a U.S. roundtable, but I don't think that they know exactly, well, I know they don't know specifically what they want, in terms of, how can you as a beef producer provide what McDonald's wants? They don't have a list yet, but they're involved in this multi-stakeholder collaboration process to figure out what that list is. And they're trying to do a good job of interacting with producers to figure out what's practical and what they can actually ask from producers. And I would encourage you all, McDonald's is really good about attending our cattlemen's conventions, and national and states, and so it's really they've gone out and spoken to many of our state cattlemen's conventions. So if that's something that you might be interested in, you may want to reach out to some of these folks that are planning conventions for beef producers, because in general McDonald's is very good about attending these things and explaining where they're coming from and what they're really wanting to get out of the sustainability aspect. So I would encourage that. The next question is, how does grass-fed finished cattle compare to grass-fed grain-finished cattle in terms of sustainability impact? So great question, Philip. We didn't study that in our particular LCA, but there's been quite a number of studies that have been done on that. Some of my initial work in graduate school, Jude Capper has also done some great work looking at grass-fed, grass-finished cattle versus grain-finished cattle. From a purely environmental impact standpoint, grain-finished cattle have less of an impact than grass-finished cattle, predominantly because they are alive a much shorter time. So anytime you increase that lifespan of an animal that's actually delivering beef, in essence, you're using more resources to get the same output as in a grain-finished animal. So that's the environmental impact category. Now that said, through a sustainability lens, we need all sorts of cattle and all sorts of niche markets to feed this growing world. So I would say that grass-finished producers have that niche market, and they should be working on ways to improve their sustainability, just like grain-finished producers should be working to improve their sustainability. If I was to recommend a third world country, we're already seeing shifts in Brazil. They're beginning to grain finish more and more cattle just from an efficiency standpoint. So efficiency lens only, grain finished cattle are more efficient. The next question is, how many comparisons were made with different production systems within the industry? Oh, so same question. For example, grass-fed versus conventional market beef production, or intensive grazing versus traditional grazing. Again, we are not making any of those comparisons through the checkoff, but there has been quite a number of comparisons done in the overall scientific community that would suggest grain-finished is more efficient. The next question is, if 40% of food is wasted, what percent of this is from out-of-date or expired labels that may still be okay to eat? Great question. I try to follow food waste research as closely as possible, and there's not a good estimate on expired labels because it's very difficult to know what the consumer is doing. But people suspect that approximately 10% of the food, and it depends on the commodity. So in other words, lots of milk is wasted, lots of meat is wasted from expired labels. There's less pickles, mayonnaise, ketchup wasted that way. So it sort of depends on the food, but right now estimates range anywhere from 5% to 10% could be avoided from changing labeling on different foods or encouraging consumer education around labeling. Yes, please repeat 40% wasted by American consumer. Okay, so 40% of all food is wasted. About 10% is wasted by the retailer, the grocery store, so by not being able to manage shelf space or things like that. 30% is wasted by the consumer and restaurant sectors. So there's quite a lot wasted in actual delivery, kind of getting food from the retailer onto the consumer's plate. If we reduced beef waste by half, only about 20% of beef is actually wasted. And if we reduced consumer waste of beef by half, it would increase our sustainability 10% overnight. So instead of having a 5% improvement in sustainability, we would have a 15% improvement in sustainability. So drastic improvement opportunities from food waste, and every commodity has that same result. Okay, we got another question. One producer here read that international law trump U.S. law on the GRSB according to their website. Is this true? Yes, it is. So the way that GRSB has written their principles and criteria, some of their principles and criteria, for example, may reference a UN law. So under the social principle, there's a principle around, I believe it is human labor laws, I think, that references a UN policy. Well, in that example, in the U.S., our law is more stringent than that UN policy, so our law would be in place there. Hopefully that answers your question. The next question is, will concerns about sustainability change or evolve if hunger rises as we approach 2050? Yes, in my personal opinion, we won't be as concerned about sustainability if people are hungry. That's also true, right? I mean, the sustainability in many consumer minds also includes things like GMOs or hormone use or other things, and I don't think that becomes a concern if we're hungry. It's certainly not a concern globally, and the sustainability conversation is very different globally than it is here in the U.S. In the U.S., U.S. beef is considered the most unsustainable commodity by many of our critics. Globally, we're the most sustainable beef production system, and those countries that have hungry people are striving to have an industry like ours. So my experience in that setting would suggest that if we get hungry, this becomes less of an issue. The next question from Jeff Fisher. What will the net effect be on sustainability with reduced cow numbers since 2011? Great question. I don't know the answer to that, Jeff. I also have concerns around LFTB, so lean finely textured beef, or pink slime, and the fact that that was an efficiency that we pulled out of our, was pulled out of our system. I have concerns about technologies that have been removed from our systems, and I have concerns about the reduced cow numbers from things like drought that we can't control, because those things relate to the efficiency of our beef production system, and they can change this research very quickly and very dramatically, because this is truly based on an efficiency standpoint. So great question that I don't have an answer to yet. There's some good things going on. Hopefully the cow herd will be rebuilding. Markets suggest that it is rebuilding. We're seeing lean, finely textured beef coming back. So hopefully, when we're going to update this in 2016, this particular project. So hopefully we'll have more of it back when we do those updates. Hopefully the cow herd will have grown, and hopefully we'll have gained some of our technology use back, because those things really can drastically impact the efficiency of an entire beef system like ours. Good question. All right. Well, thank you for being such an interactive audience, and thank you to the Ohio State University for setting up these webinars. This is a great way for us at NCBA to reach a wonderful number of people and to be able to share our sustainability story so that we can all be singing the same song.